Hello, everyone. Welcome to Creativity-Hive's weekly program. And you probably already know this, but I'm Miriam Haugen, and I'm part of the Creativity-Hive team. We help creatives to make impactful storytelling videos through one-on-one teaching and live group coaching. And this week we have a different format for our show. I'm going to be just stepping aside and letting Paul Murphy, hi Paul, and
Hello.
Neil just have a conversation.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna see you later, guys.
Okay. All right. Go grab a bite. Yeah, I was talking to Miriam about this a while ago, Neil, because I recognized your name as soon as I saw it, and that is, as a self-taught editor who, learned Premiere Pro and learned editing from books, but more importantly from user forums. When I saw your name, I recognized it very well from the Adobe user. What is it? It's the Adobe support community, where
Right.
you're a prolific solver of problems there. And I just wanted to throw some stats out for you for a second. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I have been a member of the Premiere Pro Adobe support community since March 2005. I have made 78 posts, and I've had 6 solutions in that time. Now, compare that to yourself. You joined roughly about a year later, 2006. You've had 33,730 posts and 1,979 solutions. So you are somebody who solves problems by the sounds of it.
Well, and one of those fun things that you get into, and here I got to adjust my mic. For anybody watching this, I had to do a little change here. I was planning on being reversed because I've got multiple cameras in my setup here. But they changed from the Jive forum setup here a couple of years ago to Chorus. And
Right.
in that process, I lost a few thousand points. So so that I thought that was kind of interesting. I even took a screenshot of the last day showing my stats while it was still on Jive.
So that would explain why some of your first posts that I can see here are 2014. But do you think you were probably posting before 2014, right?
Yes, I was. Although because a lot of the earlier stuff was while I was still primarily working in stills. I set up our portrait studio back in. Now, see, Miriam should still be on here because she'd help correct that, and she may pop in with a category like she just did that little thing that popped up on the screen there.
Right.
But it was what 77 or something like that, 1977, when I left college. I went to college. We didn't realize it at the time, but I look back now, and a couple of years ago, I finally realized I went to college to get this. And once I
I'm the
had
same.
that, I didn't. I mean, it was kid stuff. I
Yeah.
lost interest in classes, and I just went out and started and got myself a job by creating my own portrait studio business.
Yeah.
And I was only a term and a half or 2 terms from graduating, and people were going, "You're nuts." Like, I had no interest in that last little bit. It was wasted time. And so for since about 77 to on, we had this portrait business. Miriam taught in the public schools music for about 6 years, and then she started working in the studio because I have my strong suits, and I have areas where I'm not so strong, shall we say, to be polite and kind and not use any nasty words. And I desperately needed assistance for some things. And so she started working part-time, and then she was working full-time while still and cut down her public school teaching to part-time. And then she just went, and then over time, I got her to do some photography too, because the first thing she was doing was primarily the client relations and sales and whatnot, because
Yep.
it was clear I was abysmal at oh my God, yes, the bookkeeping was an absolute, we won't even want to talk about that. But yeah, bookkeeping, organizational paperwork stuff, and of course, is long prior to computer, so it was paperwork. And but sales, I just I could not work with customers well on sales. I could do glorious images, I just couldn't do sales. And so she was doing that, and I thought she'd be able to do very well in the photography, and got her dragged into that. Well, over time, she ended up doing all of the public facing stuff, including the photography. And I put myself more in the background because there were just always strange interactions. And I read everything I could on getting along with people, and of course, doing sales. We were very active in our professional associations, both state, regional, and nationally, and going to quarterly conferences and seminars all the time. But there were just always weird things that would happen that would have people going, how did that conversation go odd there? That it didn't make any sense. And so with Miriam, these things didn't happen. And well, we found years later in would have been 2005 or somewhere around in there, that we had a college-age daughter and a 5-year-old son who were both diagnosed autistic, and at around the same time. And
can I just add as well, my son is also 5 and was diagnosed autistic about a year and a half ago.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of those things that our daughter found a book published by a Canadian psychologist called So Odd a Mixture. And if you want to understand about practical autism, I highly recommend getting this book. It looks at, she's an autism expert, but she's also a big fan of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And she looks at Pride and Prejudice and goes, excuse me, we are talking with a whole bunch of autistic people here.
Right.
Because everything, Mr. Darcy is clearly on the spectrum. He was given good principles, but he's just failed to be able to pull them off all the time. And you go, oh, so totally on the spectrum. The family of all the girls, the dad, who's always going off into his study and letting things go on and everything because, well, I should be doing this, but I'm going to go to my study. Well, yeah, he's autistic too. His wife, who's always shrieking about things and whose mind is wonderfully facile at looking at something as all horrible and then all good and everything like that. She is also on the autism spectrum, as is the daughter that runs off with Mr. Wickham. And clearly, of course, the cousin or whatnot that is the parson that wants to marry one of the young ladies and then marries a friend. Yes, he's on the spectrum. And so Odd a Mixture explains what it is about these people that show that they're on the spectrum, and of course talks of how people react to them and how other people see this kind of behavior, both at that time and in our time. Wow, it was actually embarrassing for a while. I mean, I almost was afraid to go out in public because I'm going, well, people look at me like that? Holy, ugh. And but then after a while you get, well, yeah, but okay, I'm living and I've made it this far, so I guess I can go back out in public again. But it really showed how all those years where I had, by just analysis, had gone, I'm not the one in our facility to handle public connections. That's better handled with somebody else. I was actually correct. I didn't know why it was, but I was looking at what was going on and going, no, we're better off. My business is better off if this person does that rather than me. And there were parts of it that, of course, were incredibly frustrating because I was good with the camera and the people. I drove myself on the technical stuff. So my technical skills were vastly, my technical skills were up somewhere close to or in what you thought of for the commercial or the industrial photographers, who normally had a lot more technical skills than portrait photographers. My posing skills were good and very varied. I didn't fit people into a mold. I could completely build it around how comfortable the people were to move into certain things. So there's all those things that I could do that where I was really good, but nobody had any loyalty to me. I mean, our clients never, other studios in other small towns, once they had done something for a family, that family was going to be going to that studio for, the next 30 years. We'd do something, they loved the image, and 2 or 3 years later, we find out they had a kid that had a birthday party or graduation or something that were photographed by somebody else. And they're really nice images too. And we'd just be going, wow, how come we get no loyalty? Well, people don't, there are some things that are innate about being on the autism spectrum. And one of the most, the most common thing, and I think probably the most defining thing for autism, is there is a part in your brain that for normal people, and it starts from when you're a baby, it gathers data about what's going on around you. So when someone is talking to you, it's taking input from your eyes and your ears, and it's learning to process that data along with the words to find or to apply or to create meaning or context for the words. And so and people say, so you're talking about something like so your body language or something like that. And no, body language is a very gross, or macro thing. This is a very micro thing, a very tiny thing. We're talking what they figure it is incredibly tiny little movements at the corners of the eyes, nose, and mouth, and changes in the tenseness of your vocal folds. Well, most people aren't really that much aware of my vocal folds tense a little bit more or relax a little bit. If you do a large thing, they are, but not in small amounts. But your subconscious actually can measure all that. And so, quote unquote, normal brains have that going. They hear the words and see the person, but they have this going on in the background they don't even notice, and it takes everything and comes up with the real meaning. Okay, for an autistic person, that part of our brain isn't doing that. We do not apply that, and it's both ways. Not only do we not apply it when we're looking with other people, we're not applying it to our own face, because that's, of course, part of the thing it goes. And it...
Sorry, what do you mean when you mean you're not applying it? Do you mean as in that background process? Do you mean you're not aware, you're not doing that processing?
My brain doesn't do that processing. I am not aware of any of that kind of data, whatever. And the other thing is that part of your brain also sends the sending information to your face and your vocal cords to essentially mimic what you see in others. So it's a two-way street. I don't do either end. And
so what are you processing at that stage then? Is it just the words and the meaning of the words?
It's just primarily the word. Yeah. We autistics tend to be a lot more literal on things. Now, of course, I was an English lit major in college. I can apply irony and sarcasm, this kind of stuff, but it's normally pretty bloody obvious if I am doing so. And but how I appear, how I sound, how I seem can be very contra what my words are to many people. And so I've been in conversations where there's 4 people and we're just like a little square standing there talking. And the people on my right and left are on opposite ends of a discussion, and they're kind of angry about it. And myself and the guy I'm opposite of are both trying to go, well, yeah, we're just trying to stay in the middle here and not really tick off anybody. And all of a sudden, both of the people on the right and left get mad at me and mad as hell and make a few really nasty comments and leave. And the guy opposite me is going, uh, the hell just happened? Well,
Mm.
they both read a comment where I was trying to say something very middle of the road, non-specific. I was there was a little tension or something like that because I'm nervous about it because you're right in the middle of these two people look like they're about ready to pull knives out, right? And so they caught something there which told them that my words actually meant something completely different than what the words actually were.
Mm.
But they believe what I meant was what their internal processing told them. This is what anyone saying this, doing it this way under this circumstance would mean. They don't have any clue that it's a processing thing in their own head. They're very certain I meant to communicate that. And it's something where I have no clue what idea they took off of it. I have
And
no way of.
is it something over time that you have developed a way to respond to people who have responded to you like that? Do you sort of look out for the signals?
I didn't used to, of course, before I knew I was on the autism spectrum, I didn't know that was what was going on. And I would try and just force my way through conversations. No, you're mistaken. I did not say that, this kind of stuff. And people would just get madder at me. You certainly did mean that.
Yeah.
And I'd be going, you bloody fool. I wouldn't think of that. Well, I know you thought you were thinking that. And I'm just going, wow, you're telling me you know what I'm thinking when that's not something I'd ever think. And that gets kind of frustrating. And one of when you realize you're autistic as an adult, one of the first things, of course, we all seem to go through, and both our daughter and I have been on numerous adult autistic forums and looked at the discussions. And it's very common. You go through, okay, try and figure out how to make yourself blend in. Well, you can become less, quote unquote, offensive.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the main ways you can do that is by understanding that, say, in a general conversation, and that's where I have the most trouble, just three people standing around shooting the bull.
Mm-hmm.
Because you start a comment on a particular subject, there will be from 2 to 7 or 8 comments about that, and then the subject will move. Okay. An autistic person is safe if you are the second person to comment. You are probably safe if you are the third person to make a comment after the subject change. It's probably wise not to say anything until the subject changes again. Because if you make the fourth or later comment, you'll have people going, oh my God, they're keeping us on that same old subject and everybody wanted to move on. If you change at the, say, the fourth comment, wow, the bloody hell! I had a comment there, and you just cut me off, and you're going, well, you have no idea how normal people do this, and it's reading and seeing all these things that they get some meaning back and forth that we don't know. Like the question, do I think autism has helped me become such a PR expert?
Miriam has beat me to the next question.
Yeah.
Because there you're of course dealing with, that's dealing with a lot of people. And of course, there probably is a bit more of a black and white interaction there, where I have a problem. I don't understand how this works. How do you think your being on the spectrum contributes to that?
Well, one of the things that is very common for those of us on the spectrum is to obsess with or do deep dives into things. And so it means that we, a lot of times, will pick up a tremendous amount of knowledge in very narrow little bits and pieces here and there. So we will have various areas where we have incredibly deep knowledge. We don't know jack about the thing next to it, but this item we've got incredibly deep knowledge on because we've been fascinated by it and we've looked it up. And the whole way I got into the video thing was think that, well, okay, there were people that were starting to add video to their websites. And of course, remember, I'm not doing much of anything with the camera shooting anymore. So I thought, well, maybe I can shooting a little video. And if I'm shooting video of Miriam and her clients, then I can actually do some camera work and it'll be okay, right? Well, me being me and being autistic, you see, one of the things you have with autism is frequently, of course, and it's the same with ADHD, ADD, is what's called executive function disorder. A lot of times we're making decisions can be literally physically painful. And editing, as you know, Paul, is all about making millions of decisions. Are you going to, which order are you going to put things on a sequence? And not only that, but once you put them on the sequence, what's a cut? Is it 1 or 2 frames later, 1 or 2 frames shorter? I mean, I've stood there by someone like Christine Steele or Yarla Leopold when they're working, they're talking with you while they're working at an event, right? And they're on a laptop and they've got a program they're cutting. And this is a serious, this is going to go broadcast TV somewhere, this thing that they're cutting. So it's not like they're doing just some playing around little personal thing, right? And they're going through clip after clip, bang, 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 going into trim mode, making little cuts and everything like that. Oh my God, that would be painful for me to try and work that way. But I've gotten better, a little at it.
But you clearly have an understanding. You clearly have an understanding of the system behind it too, right? Like, just as someone who has glanced your solutions to problems over the last 10, 15 years, you clearly have a comprehensive knowledge of the program at the same time.
Well, we go back to the whole thing, actually, to one thing I'll jump back to here is, remember I said I was analyzing the stuff in my business? Mm-hmm. One of the things that I was an English lit major, minored in PE and music, 2 minors, in a high school ed teaching program at our little college here. It's how I met Miriam. And one of the teachers I had in the ed department did testing on you like crazy. And in one of his tests that he put people through was to determine how your brain worked, what kinds of the various cognitive skills your brain worked and used. And he had a very extensive series of testing. And you'd go through these tests and you'd go and you'd talk with him. And I went in and talked with him after he had one on what kind of cognitive modes our brains worked in. And he just looked at me and said, wow, I've never had a result like this. And I'm going, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. And he's kind of looking at me like, okay. And he said, analysis and synthesis is one of the 6 things on the that they were testing for. And I scored off the chart on that. And I'm sitting there going, okay. And he's just looking at me and going, I don't mean you scored high. I mean, literally, you scored off the chart. They didn't have and I'm going, no. And he goes, this doesn't surprise you. And even back then at college, I was going, no. And he was going, oh, well, yeah. And this is one of the things that I've realized over the years. My brain works analysis and synthesis. Analysis is you look at a Mack truck and it's, big 18-wheel truck with its big trailer, right? You got the big tractor part of it, the truck part at the front, and the trailer. Analysis is you mentally take that thing apart and you put it in bins. Everything is organized into bins. All of the particular type bolts are in one bin and this kind of stuff. Pieces of metal that are the same size and color. Everything's in a bin. And synthesis is you go through all these bins and make something completely different out of them. Well, that's what my brain does everything with. And so when I'm trying to understand anything, I'm pulling it apart and then putting it back together in a different way, because once I've done that, then I can understand it and I know what I'm doing. And so, yeah, I learned how to do a lot of this stuff because of just looking at the descriptions and doing a little bit. It just didn't feel comfortable doing it until I knew exactly why. And so for a lot of these things that were the areas where I have learned, that's what I've pulled it apart. And of course, I'll spend hours working on it. It drove Miriam nuts back when I was working in the camera room, because I'd be going, I'm not exactly understanding how to meter a light in this circumstance. What I get for the meter doesn't work out, doesn't show up in the print exactly like I'm expecting. And so I'll spend all day, a whole bunch of film that we had to pay. We were paying by the back. a medium format film, shooting 220 roll film. By the time you paid for the film and the processing of the film and a 4x5 print of each one, it was costing us like $1.10 every time I tripped that camera. I'd go through 10 rolls of film, 20 exposures each, 200 exposures at $1.10 each in a day, trying to puzzle out my lights. And Miriam's going, first we have work, and second, oh my God, the money you're blowing on this.
Yeah. Thank goodness for digital.
Exactly. But I knew my lights and I knew my meter then.
Yes.
And so I
would say, as someone who is not on the spectrum, my son is on the spectrum, but I am not.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you really can't properly use the tools until you know them that way. And I think one of the earliest times I learned that was Patrick. This will resonate with you. Patrick Inhofer was doing a presentation on speed grade back in the days of speed grade, and all he had on and you know, I thought I knew a lot about the software, but I was about to learn that I did not. But all he had on screen was a horizontal gradient from black to white. And then next to that, he had a scope where he would start, you know, pulling sliders and things like that. And you would see how it was affecting that gradient. And I suddenly went, oh, there is a way, like, rather than just what the slider is telling you, maybe the slider is telling you contrast. But until you actually see how that's being affected scientifically, measured on a scope, you don't fully understand what these controls are doing. And I think as something like Premiere is introducing more AI and machine learning, it's even more important to understand what the technical thing underneath that slider is doing if you're going to use it in a meaningful way, I think.
Oh yeah. Well, and mentioning Pat Inhofer and who actually employs me now, because I work for Mixing Light. I teach how to do color in Premiere to Mixing Light to Resolve colorists who have, of course, Resolve has tools that do far more than Premiere. But hey, I've pushed Premiere around enough. I can do a ton of what they do in Resolve, or what I can do in Resolve because I work in it all the time now. I can make Premiere do that, and they'll go, no, you can't do this in Premiere, and I'll be going, sure I can. I've done it a bunch of times. Not even that difficult if you know how to do it. But speed grade was speed grade was awesome. Speed grade was not as deep and wide a tool set as what was DaVinci Resolve. I call it Black Magic Resolve because DaVinci hasn't been around as a company for years, and Black Magic has changed it through so many versions now. But Speed grade was set up so that you could do quick targeted, especially if you've got a control panel like the one I've got here. I'm not set right now to bring it up on my screen. If you had a control panel, you could quickly do very targeted things and apply them to a bunch of clips up and down the line between a control panel and a button box, or your number pad. So you could work fast and do all kinds of stuff in speed grade. It was great for color. And that's even, you see, when I first started editing and I with Premiere Pro, when I was doing the stuff I talked of, that was back CS6, just about a year before they came out with the Creative Cloud. And they had, you had both Premiere Pro, and then you had Speed Grade, a very separate app that you did color correction in. And so you could open up a Premiere project in Speed Grade. And then they came out with a CC version and what they called Direct Link. So you could be working in Premiere and you would just hit a thing, say send to Speed Grade. It would bring up Speed Grade. You do your color correction and you go back to Premiere and the color corrections would be there. It didn't slow down Premiere. It didn't affect playback.
It's pretty amazing, actually.
I
don't think I've
awesome.
ever seen it done so smooth that way between two programs. Like even dynamic link between After Effects and Premiere was nothing like that direct link with Speed Grade.
Dynamic link for me has always been problematic. That direct link was just so slick. That was great. Yeah. But the kinds of decisions you were making in color makes my brain go, ooh. And so the kind of decisions you make in color are not a problem for me. I love doing that. And so rather than learning to be a good editor for the stuff I was supposedly supposed to be doing so we could put some video on our website, I got into making it look pretty.
Yeah.
And in about a 3 or 4 month period, I went from asking the most questions on the Speed Grade forum to answering the most questions. And then I got an email in like late February or something like that of 2014 from this guy, Patrick Palmer. I had no idea who he was. And he, in all caps, NAB, whatever that was.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, could we have dinner? So I Google, of course, right? Oh, he's the guy that created SpeedGrade. Actually, he created Iridas with his partner, Lynn, whose last name I've forgotten. And Adobe bought it out, called it SpeedGrade, and Patrick stayed to run SpeedGrade. And NAB was National Association of Broadcasters. It's this huge show, one of the largest trade shows in the world every year, held in Vegas in April. And anything with motion, video, sound, I tell people that it's a place where a lot of the people, when you say you're talking about drones, they look at you and go, that's not a drone, that's a quadcopter. That's a drone. And they point up, and of course, there's somebody that's got one of these things that's got 40-foot wings, and the plane part of it is like 30-foot long, and it's got a turbo fan engine on it, and it's gray and can fly at 30,000 feet for 6 hours. And they say, that's a drone. That's a quadcopter. And but anything you can think of, all the software is there, all the hardware. If you want to do the sports coverage for the Super Bowl, there's trucks out there. They have 18-wheel trucks that are completely set up, all the gear on them, ready for you to walk out, buy that truck that's outside the building, and drive off, and you have everything you need to have your mobile thing to record something like the Super Bowl and stream it live. So I thought it was a hoot, because here I am, a small town guy just getting into it, and I'm being asked by this guy for Adobe, this massive company, to go to Vegas and have dinner with him at this video thing.
Do you remember what year that was?
2014. And I walked up the hall and to Miriam's office, and because I thought it was funny. And so I told her, and Miriam was sitting there going. So I figured that it obviously was not as funny to be told as it was to have, for me to have been in. And I came back to my office, and a few minutes later, she was hanging in the doorway back there behind me, just staring at me. And so I turned around and looked at her and said, what? And she went, well, if we were younger, you'd be going. And I'm, yeah, but we're not. You're going. And she went to get tickets. And so I went down, met, and when I said yes, I got asked to participate in a number of other things, some of which I can't talk about, and which I thought was also kind of, whoa, that's intriguing, and got into online discussions with Robbie Carmen, who is noted colorist, and he's taught at World at Post-Production World for years. Everything. He's been to China to teach colorists to groups of 500 at a time, this kind of thing. And I got in an argument with him over he had some SpeedGrade tutorials out on LinkedIn, and on this one very private forum, I mentioned, does anybody know this Robbie Carmen guy? Because he's confusing people by saying this one thing is called a contrast control when it's actually more of a brightness control. And I posted that like on a Saturday. I'm on the Pacific Coast, US. Okay. I posted it like on about, 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. It's not a time when most anybody in the US is going to be looking at this kind of stuff, especially a very specialized SpeedGrade type of form. And within moments, there is a response saying, which would be, if you were at a party, would be the equivalent of someone going, don't look over your right shoulder, but he's standing right there and he heard that comment, kind of thing, And I'm going, huh? because he hadn't posted anything on that forum.
Mm.
And Robbie's East Coast. He's Washington, D.C. He's 3 hours later. It's like 9 o'clock. So it's like midnight, at about 12:30 p.m. his time, I get a post back saying, the hell do you know about this? Essentially. Robbie is always willing. Drop of a hat. Robbie will love getting into a discussion on something like that. And it's nothing personal, but he loves getting into these just real intense discussions. And so that was my first connection with him. So I'm going down to Vegas. And I'm all of a sudden on some of these forums. And so one of the things that I decided I'd do was I'd go to Mixing Light held the colorist function at Vegas. And so I would, on the forums, my face is my avatar. And so it's not that hard to recognize me when I walk in someplace. And Robbie does the same thing. So I walk into, they had a bar that they had rented on Sunday night before NAB. And I walk in and I'm fairly early. And, it started, but it's, like the first 20 minutes or so. Robbie was talking with someone. He just looked up. He's smiling. He's got his drink in his hand. He's talking like that. He looks, excuse me. And, just boom, beeline right over to me. And I'm going, okay. And he just, Neil, nice to meet you, Robbie, and grabs my arm and off we go. And we go into another part of the bar. And there's this older guy who's a little bent over and his hair's been white for the last 20 years. And everything, obviously venerable, elder colorist statesman. Okay. Robbie goes up and immediately starts laying out the crux of the discussion that we had over actually several days on whether this was a brightness or a contrast control. And I have to say, Robbie was doing an excellent job of both laying out the specific reasoning behind both sides and not saying which was either. An amazingly good job at just laying out this discussion on its naked, bare points. No emotions, just the discussion. And the guy was looking at us, and after a moment, he kind of grinned and he looks over at me, and then he looks over at Robbie and he says, Robbie, you're wrong. He's right. You should call it a brightness control because you're confusing people. And Robbie's going, and he looks at me, and it's just like this, I'll get you. And everything. But we have gotten along really good. Robbie is, oh my God, the guy knows this stuff cold. And I have learned so much from him over the years. And I think
Robbie is a great example of somebody who not only knows it really well, but knows how to communicate it to others really well. It's a really good sign of how just knowing the software is not good enough. To be a good teacher, you need that sort of affable communication skill that Robbie has, I think.
Yeah. And he is, wow. I mean, Robbie is one of those people that is amazingly good at picking up the technical nuances and storing the data and being able to recall it, because there's a lot of the stuff that I can look it up and I can understand it. Mm-hmm. And I understand how it works. I've taken it apart, so I know how it works. But, okay, so 3 months later, you want me to just quickly spot off. What do you do when you got the IDT going to the well, I know how it needs to be structured, but I'm not necessarily going to come up with all the acronyms and everything like that. And Robbie just be going, oh, well, see, you do this, like that. And you go to here and you put this and you put this in here and then here and they do like this. And then you do a splitter and then you do this and there you are. And I'm going,
impressive.
Yeah, that's what you do. And, so in some ways it's kind of nice that one of the main color things I deal with is Premiere Pro's rather limited Lumetri panel.
Can I get your take on that actually? Because
sure.
I don't think I've never quite figured out exactly what the vibrance slider does, but you give me an overall view first.
Okay. Back when, and this part is a little bit speculation on my part, but back when
Miriam, I want to go over time a little bit just to hear this, okay?
Yeah. back when I was first getting into this, and Patrick Palmer was running SpeedGrade, the man that ran Premiere Pro, I know from having discussions with him at NAB, was not a huge fan of editors doing anything in color. He pretty much, if you talk to him in an aisleway discussion down there, pretty much said editors have no effing business doing color because they're going to screw it up because they don't understand it, and I don't want to have. I'm not going to be giving people anything to screw themselves up like that. That's a colorist thing, and they're going to be working in Resolve or Baselight, and so that's. And he was not a huge fan of SpeedGrade, of even having the app there. Clearly, he didn't. And just even my just standing there and watching, he did not respond well to the SpeedGrade. So I always felt that he seemed, for my view, which could easily be wrong, but in my impression was he was not that pleased with SpeedGrade. Well, then all of a sudden, Patrick is moved off into something else, and SpeedGrade is taken directly under him. And 2 months later, it's announced that SpeedGrade is EOL, end of life, and they're going to be discontinuing it.
I remember it.
And I posted some things that got me in a bit of hot water, where I pointed out that, to me, Blackmagic had just started trying to turn Resolve into getting some editing capabilities. I thought, among other things, this was bad for their own clients that all of a sudden couldn't, because you could do color correction in from Premiere Pro so flippin' easy. It was insane. But that it not only was stupid for their own customers, it was stupid long term for the company. And whoa, that was. I was the next NAB after they EOL'd SpeedGrade, when I showed up, and I was still answering by then a lot of questions on the Premiere forum, but I showed up, and you have this huge booth that they would have, and around behind they have a theater for like 200 people to watch presentations, and behind that there's this huge wall, and then they have this whole series of counters where they have computers set up, and have a couple where Premiere Pro is being demonstrated, and Audition and After Effects and whatnot. And I'd go around the back, and all the staffers they'd see me, and it'd be this. Because they were looking around to see if the head of Premiere was around, because if he was, they weren't going to recognize me.
Yeah,
they would not talk with me or anything. And
so it feels like Adobe has made a very calculated decision that color grading, as far as Adobe apps is concerned, is a very specific range that people can use. So you could never go quite as deep as you could in something like Resolve. You could certainly do a lot more than what you used to. Hard to say. In terms of the native effects that they used to have in Premiere. But it very much feels like, I always think of like the future of editing is like these apps are trying to decide if they're Microsoft Word or Adobe InDesign. And it feels like the decision in terms of color correction for Premiere Pro has gone down more the Microsoft Word route, where we're going to make it easier. And if you're a professional, maybe you can really push this tool to get something quite special out. But by and large, it's designed for people who don't want to do a lot of work on color design, on color correction.
Yeah. And now the fun thing was, about a year or so after that, all of a sudden, that head of Premiere Pro was replaced with Patrick Palmer. And I got to NAB, and it was right before NAB, and I got to NAB, and Kevin Monahan, one of their product support managers that's on the forum a lot, was at the who I've had a lot of beer with. He was out at the front corner where he normally is, and he goes, "Hey, Neil, by the way, there's someone down the highway here you really ought to see." because the year before you did not even see Patrick at NAB hardly at all. And I looked down and there's Patrick Palmer talking with a whole bunch of reporter types. Oh, cool. So I go walking down and he sees me coming and he just smiles and he basically says, "Oh, thank you. We can talk later now," and sends them on their way. And he turns to me and I'm looking at him and he says, "Well," and I see on his name tag hanging there that there's something about program manager. And I go, "Wow, so you're the new Al?" And he goes, "No," and he holds it up. "Oh, Al was head of Premiere Pro. Patrick is head of DVA, digital video apps. He's head of everything, Premiere Pro, After Effects, and Audition." And it's like, whoa, that's a change. And so he has worked over the last 3 years or so to try and get a bit more color. And of course, the other thing they had was it was a Rec 709 app, which for a lot of people means, SDR standard. But things have been changing and you've got to be able to have the color management for the HDR stuff. And so they've been trying to add that in.
And there's still a bit of confusion about that now, isn't it?
No, there's not a bit of a confusion. There's a lot of confusion about that now. And
it's unclear whether they're going back to 709 or I've heard a few different things.
Oh no, it's definitely and there are things that I understand. I know a lot of these people. I like a lot of them personally, but they do things that I still get puzzled about. Like a year ago, this last fall, I was doing when Max was totally virtual, and I was going to be doing a presentation, and I wanted to know, okay, so are you going to be doing your typical thing of dropping the next version on the first day of Max? Well, they didn't want to say because, of course, they're not supposed to say that. And I'm going, oh, Becky, I want to be doing it in the one that they're going to be using on the first day of Max. Is that yes or no? And they wouldn't even. You're paid to do these presentations, right? And they wouldn't even tell me. And so it's like, okay, freaking on that. I'm going to assume. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it in the beta program, and we're going to go. And I had my presentation was how to use log and a half an hour presentation on and how to take log media from a Red Komodo, from a Sony A7S III with its quasi log, because it isn't. It's kind of, sort of, but not really log. And even though it says it's an S-Log 3, it's, yeah, right, whatever. And with a Panasonic GH3, and a Mavic drone. So we're covering a lot of different types and bit depth of media, how to take this from both some outside shots and some inside shots, and how to quickly get the whole thing put together so that as you cut back and forth between shots and a scene, having several scenes where we've got multiple cameras on the same scene, how to do that so that it all looks good. You have your shot matching done real quick, and you can even get to a little bit of a show look really quick. And so I did a lot of work, and notice there's log in that. I mean, log and raw. Oh no, and there was a Pocket 6, a Pocket 4K Blackmagic too, so Blackmagic raw in there also. And with the public beta program, okay? So that program drops on, the 22.0 dropped on that Monday that Max started. And by the afternoon on the forum, we were getting things from people saying, what the heck, my color is just all over the freaking place. Okay. Up through the public betas for 22.0, it was still underneath a Rec 709 app. They had some controls where you could set for HLG or PQ. What they dropped with the 22.0 public release was, as I referred to it, a color space agnostic app. Your color space is dependent upon your sequence. What do you want for your sequence? You can set your sequence to 2100 in either HLG or PQ, or you can set your sequence for color space of Rec 709. Your clips have to be color managed by the app before they get to that sequence, or bad things happen. And and that control is buried in for color managing the clips is in the project panel. You have to select one or more clips, right click on them, and then modify / interpret footage. And that dialog box gets you to at the bottom of it to an option for 3 options for color managing your media. And that are not necessarily named in an obvious way for exactly what they do. And it was just like, what that, huh? And all of a sudden, most log media, if you put a log media on a Rec 709, SDR sequence, it showed up all blown out. I mean, both your highlights were your what you would think of as midtones were blown to pure white, and so I mean, it was just way overexposed looking, and obviously your saturation was just blown to smithereens too. Well, HLG is of course hybrid log gamma, hybrid log gamma, hybrid log format with gamma applied for the shadows. That's HLG. PQ is slightly different, but and then all of a sudden I realized when I was dealing with this at one point that Kevin Shaw of works with Warren Eagles in the Color Society International and also FX PhD training, said in one of his HDR trainings that while some Rec 709 is shot in log forms, logarithmic thing where you have this curve that actually goes like this from that camera angle. All HDR is shot in log. And I was realizing, oh, that's what it was doing. Premiere was just anything that was in log, it was dumping onto the sequence as if it was HDR. And if you were trying to do SDR, you had to go into the clip, right click, modify, interpret footage, override to Rec 709. Then you could use that as log footage on a Rec 709 sequence. And
sounds so straightforward and simple, Neil.
It is kind of straightforward. It kind of works well. And as Robbie Carmen works,
no, it sounds the opposite of straightforward and simple or intuitive.
It isn't. And how would anybody know where to find it in there? Why didn't they give us something that I asked for, which was, they've got the essential sound panel, right? Where you have all those audio controls you got in one place. The essential graphics panel to do all the motion graphics and this kind of stuff in one panel, right? Why don't we have an essential color panel that has all of your color management defaults and overrides and everything in one panel so you know what's going on? Because what we now have is that, the clip color management is in the project panel in a right-click context menu.
Yeah.
The sequence color management isn't a right-click context menu. The sequence stuff, you have to go to the main menu with your sequence highlighted and then go into the sequence, and you can find, if you hunt for it, you can find the where you set it for Rec 709 or 2100 PQ or HLG. And then the exports, you have to realize that if it doesn't say HLG or PQ in the preset, it's an SDR preset. If it does say HLG or PQ, it's an HDR preset for the export, and never the twain shall be used with the other. And so it's separate things in different place. Oh, the scopes is in a different place. I mean, it's just
there's just too much room for chaos, I think.
Oh, and they weren't expecting it was going to be anywhere near this much chaos. And it's one of those things that I look at it, and I know these people, and they're good-hearted people. They're hardworking and they're pretty smart and everything. And I look at it and go, you didn't have a clue this was going to be a train wreck? Because all those people out there shooting, log media were all of a sudden their projects were shot. They couldn't figure out how because so it's all blown out. So they use Lumetri to bring the dynamic range and the saturation back in, and it looks okay. And then they go to export, and the export, it's back to being blown out again. Well, because the way it's set up, you can't do a control with Lumetri, no matter what it looks like on the monitor. If you have an HDR clip, either HLG or PQ, on a Rec 709 timeline, on export, it will be exported as HDR with back to the wider dynamic range and the greater color saturation that will be broken on an SDR presentation on anything. And so yeah, it was problematic. But and there's some things like because I've been working on some things now, and you have to know things like people go, well, but do you have to do your color management and everything? Can't you do color management in Lumetri by like the input let thing? Well, no, you can't, because Premiere will treat the color space of the clip from the project panel when you put it on the color space of a sequence, and it's got the sequence as a separate thing. But Lumetri can't change how that clip is handled for color stuff that's already set within the program. So if you don't have that set properly in the project panel, nothing you do in Lumetri is going to save you. It can't,
because it all ripples down from the way the
Yeah.
project version of the clip is set up.
Yeah, and so it's kind of confusing. It's really hard to try and grade HDR. When they first gave HDR capabilities in Lumetri, it was done what is they called overrange Rec 709 values, and to the color wheel section of Lumetri, and that was for speculars. You had your shadows, mids, highlights, your regular dynamic range stuff, and then for the speculars, because the in most HDR work, SDR, standard dynamic range, is presuming like up to about 100 nits of brightness when you're grading it. HDR work is actually only going to about 200 nits for your main program content. But what about, you got 1,000 nits or more? Well, that's the speculars. That's the bright things that have color but don't really have any detail in them are up there. Well, that was what that specular control was about. And then they pulled that specular control out of Lumetri and give us this thing now where you actually have a full HLG sequence that can handle 1,000 nits if you've got the right monitor and operational setup and everything like that, which is a whole another kettle of fish. And but you only have, in the color wheels, you only have the highlights, shadows, and mids. Well, how do you control, how do you work at setting things? Because in professional work, you're supposed to try and see to it that your highlights stay to about 200, 203, 205 for what they call graphics white. For think of they say a white paper out in sunlight. What this white would be should be supposedly about 200 for the brightest thing. And then you have if you got a highlight, if you got a light source behind me, that specular highlight, that could be 1,000 or 2,000 nits or whatnot. That's fine. Well, how do you control what's at 200 nits and what's above? Right now in Lumetri, that's difficult. What they say is, set your scopes for 10-bit, which means you're getting a 0 to 1023 reading on the left side scale, and set the scope scale to 10-bit, set the scope mode to HLG because you're probably doing HLG, and then grade that way, and it'll work out pretty good on most things. It'll work out pretty good. Okay. I'm not used to doing professional stuff too. It'll work out pretty good on most things. So because if you're actually doing professional work, you may very well run into one of those dreaded QC machines, the quality control machines. Those things are automatic. If you got a few pixels that are out of whack, you get failed.
You get rejected.
And it's expensive and it's incredibly embarrassing, and nobody wants that, right?
Yeah.
So it'll mostly work out. No, I'm not a big fan of hearing that. And so Francis then told me that, well, okay, so if you really need to, then go ahead and switch the scopes over to HDR mode, and then just kind of scrub through your timeline and see about where your stuff goes up. But there's scopes panel for either waveform or parade. You have essentially a middle line, and that middle line is at 100 nits in SDR. It is 200 nits in HDR, period. And so, but the HDR is of course logarithmic. So essentially, they have a gradicle that goes across it at about 25%, think. That's 12 nits. So halfway up to the middle is 12 nits, which is pretty dark. And then the middle is 200 nits. And the next one above that, which is at the 3/4 mark, is 1,000 nits. Okay. Figure this out. Except they say, well, it's actually IRE, not nits, which, okay, or whatever. Okay, so now try and figure out exactly where your program materials is on that scale. And it's, you really need outboard scopes if you're going to be working Premiere Pro and try and do any color in Premiere Pro for broadcast, because it's virtually impossible to set it up and without doing it. And but I look at Lumetri and go, I can see the point of it, because there's a lot of stuff I can teach you how to do a lot of basic stuff, how to actually make a program that is pretty well shot matched, and even apply some some show things eventually to it, and do a number of fixes for like bright areas or whatnot, where you have to do an HSL secondary or whatnot. I can teach you how to do all this stuff in Premiere Pro, but particularly targeted. They're very broad controls. So like in the basic tab, the shadow control affects the shadows more than the highlights. But if you talk to Pat Inhofer with that gradient thing, I've got several tools like that I'll use. And when you work with the shadow control, you see that you are moving the shadows more than you're moving the mids, which are moving a bit more than you're moving the highlights, but you're moving everything. And if you're moving the highlight control, you're doing some stuff down into the shadows too. The whites control in the basic tab is pretty much like grabbing the end point of a curves tab and moving. So that's pretty straightforward. The blacks, that's weird. It's think of having a revolving door that's hinged at about 12 nits, 10 or 12 nits, and the blacks thing does this. It's just like you're pivoting from about 10 or 12 nits. And that is just it's okay if you set mostly with the shadows and then use the black control just to move things, a point or two. But that's really about all you can do with it. And the exposure control is really kind of weird at first, because if you're going down, it is just like the whites control. If you're going up, it's putting this curve on things. Okay. Although I did figure out eventually, a long time, I didn't like using it. I've got a full Elements color panel here. I avoided the basic. Well, I did find out actually that especially if you've got log media and you're wanting to normalize it, exposure against contrast works really very nicely, because the contrast control is S or reverse, depending upon whether you're doing plus or negative. You're doing plus, a plus curve, you get a steeper line in the middle and more roll off. You push data out towards the edge and it starts rolling off. It never pushes anything past 0 or 100. But you can get the middle steeper, or you can get the middle really shallow and with a steeper gradient at the ends. And it's like if you got log media, which is very narrow on the scope, you got a scope for, like, say, like this is your 100 nits and your log media may come in and it's only filling this much of that scope. Well, you want to fill it out to here, right? Well, you hit the contrast and it's doing something like this. Notice my upper figure is going a lot more than the lower one. Well, because it's a little high. If I use the exposure control, bring exposure down here, now I hit the contrast. Now they'll both go out the same. I've got to center that on the middle to get the same thing. But and if I want a little bit more than one or the other direction, I can just move the exposure control a little bit up or down and set how I'm getting my midtones, how much of the midtones are getting pushed into the upper mids and how much into the shadows. I found, okay, actually, for normalization work, exposure and contrast work pretty slick once you've got them, but you have to do them against each other, which means you need to be on some kind of a panel, because if you're trying to mouse it where you're doing one and then the other, oh my God, that takes forever. And it's really incredibly fidgety work, and you can't really see what you're getting. And but with anything in Lumetri, in order to get targeted work, to get it so it affects only a small area of the image, you have to be working the tools against each other, and you really need a panel. And they have a few things that I won't go into at this time, but where I've had complaints, because while it allows you to map a panel better than any other program, at the same time, it has limits on what you can do with it. And so it's really kind of frustrating. And when you've got a guy that designed SpeedGrade as the head of the overall program, which was one of the fastest tools and gave you the best infinite little targeting. And it's one of the things that Patrick Palmer and I laugh about every time. He says, Neil, you still miss the old 9-way. And I'm going, oh, you better believe it.
I
keep
one day it'll come back. Maybe one day it'll come back.
But yeah, it's limited. It's workable if you know how to do it. And that's the best I can say for it.
We like to be harsh on the tools, especially people like you and I who are at the coalface of answering people's problems and things like that. But you know, there is always a way to make tools sort of work for your workflow as well, for sure.
Yeah, I've had people say that you can't do this in Lumetri, and I go, oh hell, I can do that. Now, that's not saying I want to do that.
Yeah.
That's an entirely different question.
Yeah.
And people at times don't understand the difference between, yes, you can do it. Would you like to do it that way? You know?
Yeah. Or if you only have that one app at your disposal, then that's the way you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Well, have you gotten your questions answered, Paul?
Oh, I feel like I've got like a quarter of them answered, and I'm probably going to have to come back at some other point and we can talk some more. But definitely an interesting rundown on Lumetri, being able to articulate a lot of the things that I felt but had never sort of gotten to the bottom of as well. It's very interesting for sure.
I've enjoyed getting to know a number of the people with Adobe over the years, and it bothers me some that people get so emotionally caught up in the brand, and they get so mad at things. Because there are some wonderful people working with Adobe. They disagree with me on many things. It's not their fault. It's not my fault. And you know, any group of humans is going to do anything one way. Resolve is set up on a completely different paradigm and runs it on a very different method. And I don't know anywhere of the developers in Resolve like I do in some of the ones from Adobe, but my assumption is, of course, they're good people too. They're just set up and working differently. And a lot of people think that, well, you know, they did this for this reason or did that for that reason. And most of the time when I'm listening to these people, they absolutely know they did this for that reason. And I'm going, they would never, ever have even considered that as a reason. I mean, it makes no sense from their point of view. Oh, yeah, no, they did it for this reason. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
And people say, well, then you're defending them. No, I'm just saying that you don't know what you're talking about. You know, because I can turn around and be incredibly critical. Having gotten to know a lot of them, I've been able to get into some discussions, some of which, of course, you can talk about, and some of which, obviously, you can't. And
well, I think you yourself are a very good communicator on the forums. However you feel about the features, I think you always write very thoughtful responses to people about how things actually work or what is the best way to use them. So I guess I'll take the opportunity to sort of thank you for that and just say that when I see your little avatar next to a response, I know that's as good as a check mark that says solved, because I'm like, well, if Neil's answered this question is as good as solved.
I do have a much deeper understanding of Premiere's color than most people. Not everybody. There's always somebody out there that knows better. But I've had the chance to spend time talking with the people doing the design work on it. And one of the things I know, they still smile at me when I at NAB when I come walking up to them, and that's good because they know, because and people will at times say because I can explain things that therefore I'm defending it. No, being able to explain someone else's point of view has nothing whatever to do with defending their point of view. It's just I can understand their point of view. I can explain the point of view and then tear it apart for how I think it is actually pretty damn stupid at times. Okay. But I can explain it without being nasty about them or anything like that. That's a completely different thing. And they know when I show up at NAB that I'm going to have, pages and pages of notes that I'm going to have with me about issues, because I'll take a lot of stuff that are affecting users that aren't affecting me in my work, whatever. But I see what's going on and I see it's a problem and I think this should get fixed. And so the devs know, they see me coming. Oh God, here comes Neil. And we're going to get his list of 35 things. And that'll be what he's talking about today. But he'll be back tomorrow and he'll have another list of things that he'll do tomorrow. And and I'll be after him on questions for people on the forum, because as a user, you always have different ideas than what the people designing it. And every user has a different idea of what they want anyway. So that's...
keep doing God's work anyway.
It's God's work. Oh my goodness.
It's interesting at times because I've for all the people that say I defend Adobe, I've had a few very intriguing communications from people where I've made a guesstimate or something that has come pretty close to stepping on some toes that they don't like to talk about in public. And, but it's one of those things, you're not paying me, are you? No, you're not paying me. If you were paying me, okay, I'm a company guy. I'm not a company guy. And there's
some freedom in that, isn't there?
Oh yeah, there is. And Patrick laughs about that with me. Some of the other people, they can get a little nervous about me, and Patrick just goes, "You're gonna be your free spirit." And but I do have some confidences. The things that I know have been in confidence. Of course, you've talked with people on stuff too, from whether they're from your clients or for other companies you've worked with or anything like that, where there are some things where you get talking and you get information or data that that's just something you do not ever talk about. You don't even tell people it. Okay. And there are some things that, mentioning that around me without it being in any kind of a thing where there's any kind of an NDA situation on it means you mentioned that around me at the wrong time. And, and I'm not a company man. And if that's something I think users should know, they should know. And I've had a few of those where people are going, and it's like, okay, you want to be able to have a control on what happens here. You pay me that $150,000 a year or whatever. And if you're not going to pay me.
Well, I think that's what makes you a trusted brand as well, though, in the user forum, is that you're not just there to sell software. You're there to solve problems. Regardless of whether they're bugs or misunderstandings or different workflows.
Whether it's a bug or a misunderstanding or just learning something a little bit about it, that's the whole thing, though, is solving the problem. And a lot of people will say, it's a bug. Why are you trying to get information on their software? Well, because first I'm trying to figure out what causes the bug. Because if you can get that to the developers, if they were having it in-house, they wouldn't have shipped it out to begin with. Understand.
And I can say from experience, I feel like 70% of things that people refer to as a bug are user error. It's usually somebody not understanding the tool to begin with. And that sounds like I'm saying something to Adobe's credit, but I just feel like the user is too quick to say, this isn't working, it's a bug. It's like, no, you're using the tool wrong. You need to understand the tool first.
Yeah, or you're using the wrong tool to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And all. But then even if it is a bug, okay, I'm all about the practical, and that's one of the
I'm
things
the
that,
same.
that
How can we
goes
work
with
around this bug?
being on the forum. Is you are so caught up on the spectrum. You are so caught up with practical. Okay, so there's a bug. The program is doing the stupid, dumb, damn thing right now. But how do you get the work out anyway? Well, that's defending Adobe. No, it isn't. It's just trying to figure out how to get the work out, even though there is a stupid bug in the program. 2 posts up, I said it was a stupid bug. I'm just trying to help this guy get the work out. That's all.
Yeah.
Not a
I
defense
feel
thing.
the
It's
same
just
way.
Well, that's awesome. But we need to wrap it up,
Oh
guys.
yeah. We've gone
Awesome
well over.
conversation. And free ranging as our conversations often are. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. Thank you, Neil. Say goodbye.
Thank you so much, guys. See you next
Bye-bye.
time.